Okay, welcome. My name is Jim Craven. My Blackfoot name is Omochako Kiaipoi. We'd like to welcome you to Module 2 of STTPML, So That the Peoples May Live. We are a collective of Indigenous veterans who are dealing with some of the issues of our times, as well as trying to bring the realities of the Indian world, Indian country, to both other Indians as well as non-Indians. Our topic will continue on from our introductory lecture. Now we're going to talk about treaties, and I'm going to give you the basic legal background before we start getting into the 1851, 1868 Lakota treaties, as well as the Lame Wolf Treaty governing the Blackfoot, 1855. And so let's start off with some of the basics. First of all, treaties can only be made by nations. Individuals cannot make a treaty. And the next question is then, what is a nation? Okay. Is it a matter of recognition? Is it a matter that I have to recognize you as a nation? Or do a group of people exist as a nation, whether they're recognized as such or not? That's the question. First thing you need to know is that each nation is a group of people. Okay? The second thing, and this is important, is that they have a common historical land base. One of the reasons for the Trail of Tears, for the Jalagi people, Choctaw and other people, was to take them away from their historical land base in order to break them as a nation. Because one of the fundamental requirements under international law is that they occupy a common historical land base. Also, what makes a nation is that they have a common economic life. It means that they live under a common economic system in which they participate. Whether it's a traditional economy or whatever, it means that they have their own economy. Doesn't mean they don't interact with other economies, but it means that they have their own economy and their own economic way of life and their own way of distributing and producing the means of subsistence. Okay? Also, they have a common history as a group of people. So they're recognized as a group of people who have their own unique history. Okay? These are the requirements under international law I'm giving you for what constitutes a nation. Okay? It's a matter of facts on the ground. It is not a matter of recognition or non-recognition. Okay? Also, there has to be some kind of system of governance and for deciding membership in the group. In other words, common political institutions of some kind. Of some kind. It doesn't mean you have to have a parliament or legislature, but it means you have to have a system of governance for selecting your leadership, who have this authority and standing to sign a treaty on behalf of the whole people. Okay? Obviously, you're not going to do a referendum to get every last Lakota or a certain percentage of Lakota signing on to a treaty. The treaties are signed by the leadership, the designated leadership of the Lakota or the Blackfoot or other nations. Okay? And also, there has to be a common culture and language. Not blood. Blood ties don't define a nation. Okay? That's not part of the definition. That's an additional issue. But even non-Indians, historically, who met these conditions and lived amongst Indians, were considered part of the nation. Okay? So, in each case, treaties can only be signed by nations, not by individuals. And each nation is defined by meeting these objective criteria. See? Not a matter of recognition or non-recognition. Otherwise, what would happen? What's happened all throughout the United States and Canadian history, and Australia and New Zealand and wherever there's Indigenous people. Okay? They set about to not recognize facts on the ground as a way of basically exterminating a people as a nation. Go ahead.
Would that include education, religion, medicine?
All of it under culture and language. All of it under culture and language. See, remember, every social system, whether it's indigenous or whatever, right? Every social system has basically 4 dimensions to it. It has a political, legal dimension to it. It has an economic dimension to it. It has history and geography to it. And it has socio-cultural to it. Whether it's the United States of America, whether it's the Lakota Nation, right? I don't care what it is. All nations exist within a context. And all nations have multiple dimensions to them. And they're all tied together, unlike the way American and Western social science deals with it. And so, when you're going to destroy a nation, or you're going to rebuild a nation, in either case, this is where you have to start. Because these are the foundations without which sustainability is impossible. You understand? And this is where they go after. Kill the Indians, save the man. You people are from a backward culture. You don't speak English. You're not civilized. Your economy's backward. We need to take over. We need to save you savages from yourselves, basically, is what they're saying. So each nation, so what is a treaty then? A treaty is a covenant between nations. That's number 1. Okay? Individuals can make contracts. Individuals cannot make treaties. Why? Because if I make a contract with my landlord, the only people who are really involved are myself and my family and my landlord, and maybe the property company that he works for. But when we talk about treaties, we're talking about terms that bind a whole people. In other words, a few people are signing for the many. And they're building into law a covenant in terms of a covenant that bind the whole people. You see? That's why there has to be a system of governance. And guess what? Whenever a treaty is formed, each nation recognizes the other as a co-equal. So in other words, in any treaty, each nation is recognizing the other as a co-equal for the purpose of the treaty. Doesn't mean that they're recognizing them as the same level of development, but it means that for the purpose of the treaty, they are equal. Also, the treaty assumes recognition of sovereignty. When the leadership shows up to sign a treaty, each treaty partner, each nation is recognizing the system of governance of the other that produced the leadership, that had the standing, that had the authority to sign the treaty and binding the what? Binding the members of each nation to the terms of the treaty. See, remember, in any contract, we surrender a part of our sovereignty. If I sign a lease with my landlord that doesn't allow smoking, I'm surrendering part of my sovereignty in return for consideration. Because in all treaties, there also has to be consideration for both or all parties. That means something for something. That means you don't get a one-sided treaty, just like you don't get a one-sided contract. There has to be something for something, what's called consideration. And it is mutually agreed upon. Okay? So what happens is, when nations make treaties, they recognize each other as sovereign, they recognize each other as co-equal, they're recognizing that they're signing a covenant. You all know what a covenant means, right? A covenant means a binding agreement. It means, for the purpose of these treaties, I will keep all of these terms bound that I'm bound by. You will keep these terms that you're bound by. You give up this for that, I give up that for this consideration. Okay? This is important to understand because of where we're going. Also in a treaty, just like a contract, it must be free of duress or coercion. Okay? It has to be free of duress and coercion. It has to be a meeting of the minds. There has to be a meeting of the minds. It means that the terms have to be specified and have to be cleared and clearly understood. Okay? You don't get to hand somebody in a treaty that's not in their own native language or not comprehensible, and then tell them to sign it when there hasn't been a meeting of the minds, when there hasn't been specificity in the terms, in the words that are used, what the words mean, as well as in terms of the promises that are being made, and what each party is being bound to. Okay? Also, in the case of a treaty, as we said before, each is recognizing not only the sovereignty, but also the system of governance that produce the authority to sign the treaty. Okay? Why is that important? Well, the reason it's important is none of these treaties is the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Department of Indian Affairs in Canada mentioned. In none of these treaties is the Department of War, Interior, or what mentioned. What's mentioned is leadership of each nation signing for all the people and binding all the people to the terms of that treaty. That begs the question. If we have recognized the system of governance of the Lakota or the Blackfoot by forming a treaty with them, then that begs the question, where is that system of governance now? Where did it go? When did we lose it? Under what authority was the traditional system of government of the Indigenous nations abolished and replaced by the BIA and the DIA? When did that occur? Under what legal authority? You see? That's the problem. That's part of the problem. And also, treaties bind whole populations to the terms over time. What does that mean? It means that when the treaties were signed between the Lakota and the US government, or signed between the Blackfoot and the US government or the Canadian government, each was not only setting up terms and binding their populations, but over time, meaning they are binding future generations to terms of a treaty signed long ago. In order to do that, the government has to have sovereignty and standing among its own people. And also, it has to do what? It has to keep terms as they're laid out. You don't get to simply say, I'm going to sign this treaty, but if there are any terms in this treaty that are somehow uncomfortable or inconvenient, or we think it conflicts with our Constitution and our laws, well, those parts of the treaty are null and void. No, it doesn't work that way. It can't work that way. Because then people could do what? One nation can sign a treaty, get all the advantages from this other nation in terms of surrendered terms of the treaty, surrendered sovereignty, and do what? Pick and choose which parts of the treaty that it chooses to recognize or not. That's why treaties have to be constructed according to the canons of treaty construction, which mandates a supremacy clause. Article 6, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution. And treaties shall be the supreme law of the land. And all judges of each state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution of the United States or the laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding. What does that mean? It means when you sign a treaty, the terms of that treaty become part of your own Constitution. They become embedded and become part of the supreme law of the land. And also, it says, Article 6, Section 2, the judges of each state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or the laws of any states to the contrary notwithstanding. That means you don't get to then say, but this term of this treaty violates whatever of our Constitution. The paradox is that terms of a treaty not only become part of the Constitution, but according to the Constitution, trump the Constitution. The very same Constitution they're part of, they take priority over it in the event that a claim is made the Constitution contradicts some terms of the treaty. Then you don't sign the treaty, okay? Or you clean up the treaty in order to get terms for it that you believe are what? Consistent with your own laws and your own Constitution. See?